Hey, good morning everybody. This is Cameron Snow with Danomics. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to load raster files and depth register them in Danomics. So let's get started. So raster files are generally TIFF images, JPEGs, maybe even PDFs that you only have the image and you don't actually have the digital data. So you don't have an LAS file for these. Or you may have an LAS file, but it only covers some of the data. Maybe you want to bring in something like a mud log or something like that to supplement it. Well, what I'm going to do in this video, I'm going to load up some of these raster files and show you how we do that. So I'm just going to start off with File, Upload, Upload Rasters, and I'm going to call this Wyoming Rasters because I've only got a handful from the state of Wyoming. So I'm just going to grab a zip file with those rasters in there. I'm going to hit open and going to hit OK. And this is going to upload the rasters. And then once they're finished uploading, it's going to process them. We do a little bit of, in addition to storing the original image, we do a little bit of image processing to help it load faster and to make it so it can display at different scales without a lot of distortion going on. And then once this runs, which typically raster files can be quite large, so if you're loading a large number of rasters, this can take a bit of time, but it's a pretty straightforward process. So it may be a little time consuming, but it's an easy enough process to run through. Okay, so the data has finished loading now, and you'll notice we have this database here called Wyoming Rasters. And I'm going to now open this database up just by clicking on it. You'll see that we have 6 files in here. And over here on the left-hand side, we have kind of just a preview that'll let us scroll through here so we can see, what do we have. We've actually got, like a main pass and a repeat, I believe, in here. So we can choose which one we want to include as part of this. So what I am going to do here is the next step. I'm going to depth register a few of the tracks. So there's a couple of things that we need to do. First of all, we can right click and say add track, and that creates this red box. We then want to drag it so that it lines up with the raster file, and we'll scroll down a bit here, and the red track automatically covers, I think, 80% of the remaining part of the raster file. So you'll have to scroll down a little bit and stretch this out. Well, what I'll actually do, I'll zoom out a little bit so we can see the full extents. And once I've done that, I can then zoom back in and more carefully dial that into the TD here. Okay, so now we've got our registration box around here. So a couple more things we need to do. First of all, we need to edit the track here, and we're going to add a curve here. And what this lets us do is this lets us just call up this track in the future. So we're going to give it a name. We're just going to call this a gamma ray track, even though it has gamma ray and SP. For simplicity, I'm just going to call it gamma ray. And the scale on here is 0 to 200. Now that's just for display purposes. You can't actually use that to rescale the image. It's just so you'll have a reference at the top because we didn't take the header. So once we've done that, now we need to add some depth tracks here. And so this is a depth of, we're going to zoom in a little bit here. We're going to zoom in 1 to 1. So this depth is 6,200 feet. So we're going to right click here and say add depth point, and I'm going to drag it right onto the line there. I'm going to click the pencil icon and say 6,200. Okay, and now I'm going to scroll down somewhere close to the bottom here. It doesn't have to be right at the bottom, but you know, somewhere close to the bottom. And here I see 12,000, so I'm going to add another depth point, and I'm going to call that 12,000, and make sure that is, you know, right on the line as well. Okay, so now we've registered that track. Now you'll notice, you know, we actually don't have an API for this well, so we need to get that API, and it needs to be in the same format as the API in your database. So I actually know that this is well 4.2 because it's Wyoming, and then 0.05 because it's in Campbell County, and then I've got 29105, and then 4 zeros because I'm using a 14-digit API. And then all I have to do is hit Control S to save that. Now, if you want to digitize a second track on here, because you notice there's multiple tracks, we can do that as well. So all I have to do is say Add Track. It gives us that bounding box again. So I'm just going to, you know, stretch that across. And okay, so we've got that, and I'm going to zoom out again so I can see the full extents a little bit better. Okay, so let me just pull that down a little bit here, and there we go. So we've got our box again. I am going to put this back on a more reasonable scale here. I'm going to add a depth point. You know, let's get that right on the line there. Okay, call that 12,000. Yep, and now we come back up here to a shallower depth in the well. So we're going to come back up here to about 6,200 feet, which is where we put our registration point at the top for the other one. So we're going to add a depth point here, and we're going to say 6,200 feet. And then once again, we need to give this track a name, and I'm going to, this is a resistivity track, so we're going to call it, you know, res, and we're going to put on a scale of 0.2 to 2,000 and say that's logarithmic. Hit OK. And once again, we would save our database here. And what we do is we go through and we repeat this process for each of the curves that, or each of the raster files that we have in here. So I'm going to pause the video here. I'm going to finish depth registering my rasters, and then we'll come back and take a look at them at the end. Okay, so now I've gone through and I've repeated this process across each of my files here. So let's just take a look at this as a reminder. So what we've done here is we have gone through and we have added a track to each of these. So that was just a right click and add track. Then we right clicked and say edit track, and we added the mnemonic for the curve. So we did that for both of these. And then we put 2 depth points on each track by right clicking and saying add depth point. And then we typed in our API number here so it knows what well to tie to. And we did this for each of our wells here. So, you know, we can see that we've done that for each of the wells and for each of the 2 tracks. And we've done this, you know, across all of them. Now, I will say there is no right way to do this. So one thing you'll notice here is that, and here you can actually see that I went across 2 LAS files instead of across 1. So I'll need to go in and fix this because they had two logging runs here. It looks like I stitched those together. But one thing that you will need to consider doing is deciding on how you want to display these. So right now I've split these into tracks of a gamma ray track and a bulk density or porosity track on here. You could, instead of having the track just cover the gamma ray and just cover the density and scaling those separately, you could have just one track that goes all the way across. And the process is exactly the same. You give it a mnemonic, you do the depth registration, and then you call that you know, good, you call that done, and then you would just call up the raster one at a time in the subsequent steps. All right, well, I'm going to fix this one raster, and then the next video I'll demonstrate how we can display these either in the CPI or in a map file. Thank you.